We are now recording.
We are recording. I'll call our meeting to order at 6:32 on October 26th. And I want to welcome everyone, school board members and administrators and community members and teachers who have signed on. Thank you very much for coming to our meeting. Are there any changes or additions to the agenda? David, you had said we will not have the preliminary budget review.
Yeah, we will not have the preliminary budget review, but we can keep that on there just because I think Ed is going to join us to just give well, both of us will give just a quick overview. I don't know if Katie wants to say something at that point too, but we can keep that item on there.
Okay, that is item number 8. So that would be happening at the very end of the evening. Would you like to move that up perhaps?
Yeah, I'm trying budget review. I see. Yeah, it's under. Yeah, it is 8. I see. I'm just making sure that, I didn't have that numbered, but let's see, is Ed on the line now?
He was here.
Yeah, we could start with that because it's going to be very brief.
Yeah, I'm here, David.
Yeah, it's going to be very brief, so we could start with that.
Okay, that would be great. Okay, so that will be our only change. And public comments on items not related to the agenda. Hearing none, we are moving. I'm sorry? Was someone talking? Okay.
I don't think so.
Okay, so next, I will take a motion to approve the minutes from September 30th.
So moved.
This is Nikki. I'll second. Nikki.
Scott,
Okay.
I think, made the motion. No,
Okay.
Scott did not make the motion. Who made the motion?
Sean made the motion.
Sean made the motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Do you like clarifications, any changes?
I love the simplicity.
I'm sorry, what?
I love the simplicity of them.
Okay. So all those in favor of approving the minutes from September 30th, say aye.
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 Or is there anyone in opposition? Are there any abstentions?
I abstain. People need to turn off their microphones.
That's better.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so the minutes have been approved. I have to call on Elizabeth. I'm sorry, I forgot to do this at the very beginning, but Elizabeth has a very wonderful announcement for our Mount Tuscany School District.
Thank you. And it is that we have we have a new member of our Mount Tuscany School District Board, and she's here with us tonight as part also of the Windsor Southeast Supervisory Union Board, and her name is Rebecca Roisman, and she is a lifelong supporter of the well-being and education and mental health of students. And so she also speaks so-called edu-speak, I think, to a good degree. And she's going to be great. She has a very calming presence, and I think she'll be really good for everybody. So welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and welcome, Rebecca. And okay.
Welcome, Rebecca. Thanks for being willing to be on this thing.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on. We have number 5, the Anti-Racism Task Force update. And Nikki, would
Amy?
you like to do that?
Amy, I'm sorry. Before we go and do that, would you mind if the board members introduce themselves to Rebecca, since there are so many people on here?
Oh, that would be great.
Yeah,
So what I will do, I'm going to call on people based on the list from attendance over here, okay? Instead of pictures, because you don't always see everyone. So the first board member that I see is Bill Yates.
Bill Yates. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, Bill. I know Bill.
Yeah, we already know each other.
Yeah.
Next,
Welcome.
Anne Marie.
Thanks.
Did you say my name? I'm sorry, I didn't.
I did. Yep.
Okay. Hi, I'm Anne Marie Redmond, and I'm on the Weathersfield School Board, in addition to the this school board. I mean, this supervisory union board. That's all. I'm a parent of a student that goes to Weathersfield.
Hi, Anne Marie.
And next on my list is Colleen Spence.
Hi, Rebecca. I just got here. Sorry for running a little late. I'm Colleen Spence, and I am on the Heartland board, as well as this board.
And next on my list is Elizabeth, but we know Elizabeth.
Hi. Yeah.
And Chris Garnjos.
Hi, Rebecca.
Hi,
Welcome.
Chris. Thanks.
You know me on the Windsor board, so
Hi.
glad to have you with us.
Thanks, Chris.
Next up, Mark Youngling.
Hi, Rebecca. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. I'm from Weathersfield, and, well, that's about it.
All right. Thanks.
And next is Nancy Pedrick from Mount Escutney.
Oh, you took everything I was going to say.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Welcome. We're so glad to have you.
Thanks, Nancy.
Nicole Buck.
Hi, Rebecca. You can call me Nikki, and I'm from Heartland, and I'm the chair of the Heartland board, and also the supervisory union. Good to meet you.
My pleasure.
Scott Richardson.
Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, Scott.
Hi. I'm a board member from Heartland. Welcome.
Thanks.
And Sean Whalen.
Hi, Rebecca. I'm from Weathersfield. Welcome aboard.
Thanks, Sean.
Okay, so thank you very much. I hope that kind of gives you a feel for the different people, Rebecca.
Beginning to.
And their puppies.
And their children.
Yes, and their kids. Okay, so next up, Nikki, is the Anti-Racism Task Force update. Are you willing to do that?
Yeah, I'm willing to do that.
Wonderful.
So the bulk of the update is the fact that I'm giving the update. So we met on October 15th, And let's see, Amy was there, Nancy, Christine Bourne, Mark Youngling, Sean Whalen, myself, Elizabeth, and then we had 2 members of the public. The first order of business was to appoint somebody to be the leader. Oh, and Colleen's raising her hand. You're not on the list. I'm adding you. So the first order of business was to elect a leader. And so we
I was
did that.
late to the meeting too.
That is me. And then we talked about, we just kind of generally talked, but there were no big steps that came out of it. We are waiting for righting wrongs to for Ariel and Jameson to get through their exam period. And so we're just giving them space. I sent them an email and they said they'd be in touch within a week or 2. So that should be sometime this week or early next week. And the next step is for them to do the same question and listening session that they did with our group to help drive what some of the racism issues are in our supervisory union, or not to drive the race, to understand the racism issues. And so the administrators are putting together a team of teachers to be part of that session. And then we're going to pull together a list of community members to present the draft policy 2 once we have it. So we'll review it as a committee first and then present it to a community group. And so the tasks that came out of it are that each town, each community has a representative that's going to pull together 3 or 4 people. And I was supposed to communicate with righting wrongs, and we should be getting together with them again in the next week or 2. So that's where we are. We're in a bit of a holding pattern. It is definitely not on the back burner, but we are waiting for some guidance to help us go in the right direction. And that's it, unless somebody has to add something.
Excellent. Thank you, Nikki. That's how I remember all of it. I think it was a good meeting. We talked about the reason to create a policy. It was a very good discussion, I thought.
I agree.
And thank you, Nikki, for saying, sure, I'll take the reins. Unless anyone has more questions on that, we'll move on to strategic planning. And I believe we have a PowerPoint. Is that correct?
We do. Give me a second. The agenda went faster than I was prepared for.
You want me to pull it up, Nikki, or you can do it? You're all.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. I'll sit back and relax and let you do it.
I mean, I'm not talking about doing the presentation. I'm going to pull up the PowerPoint for you. Nice.
Sure, David? I know you can do it.
Nice try. Hold on. But I can certainly put get that PowerPoint up there. Hold on.
Yeah, that would be great. So while David's working through that, the board chairs met to go over how we were going to get through the strategic plan and how we were going to present it to all of you. And so this is the plan that we came up with. So we met with Mike to kind of from Battelle for Kids to figure out how to pull this together. And also recognizing that there are some people that have not been part of this process at all. So I'm going to try to quickly go through this, which is probably going to be too fast, being that this was a year-long process. Please interrupt me if you have any questions. And Elizabeth has promised me that if I skip over something, that she's going to interrupt me and let me know that I skipped something. So this is my presentation on how we got through our strategic plan. We're going to take a step back in time and look at the processes that got us to where we are now. So David, next slide. So the Portrait of a Graduate and the strategic plan development were part of, there were 2 phases to it. In the fall of last year, we developed the Portrait of a Graduate. And then after, like right about the time that we all went into lockdown in March, we decided that we thought we could go forward with the current state analysis and the development of the strategic plan, which is phase 2. So we can keep going. So what is the Portrait of the Graduate? Portrait of a Graduate is kind of the guiding force behind how we want our students to go off into the world. We hired Battelle for Kids using grant money. And I don't know if you guys remember the last retreat where we were all in person. We watched a kind of scary video that highlighted how traditional classroom teaching, where we kind of just cram content into the student's head, was not preparing our students well for this fast-paced world that we now live in. So we kicked off the portrait sessions in the fall with 65 community members. And I refer to this as the design team. Well, we all kind of did. It had people from all over the community, and you can see kind of the list. It was really neat to be in these meetings with a town manager, an elected official, some parents, some students, and then teachers and school board members. The cool thing was that Battelle for Kids noted that this was one of the largest and most engaged groups that they've had. They said they've had large groups kick off, but they haven't continued to have that large group. And I guess we should give Craig some of the praise for that continued large group. So the goal of the portrait process was to determine what competencies our graduates need and what was most important to our community. And those competencies highlighted skills and mindsets. They went beyond content. They were intended toward broadening the whole child and looking at strength of heart, mind, and will. So go ahead, David. So through the portrait process, this is kind of the logo that we got. And then we also came up with 5 competencies that we thought best represented the things that our community wanted our students to graduate with. And that's empathy, perseverance, integrity, communication, and critical thinking. And you'll note that none of those are content-based. Those are all people-based and critical thinking-based. The other thing that you'll note on there is the be the voice. We really thought that everybody needs to have a voice in this process. Students, teachers, administrators, community, everybody needs to be part of working with our students. So, go ahead. So perseverance is one of them, and I might just let you guys read for a second because I'm not very good at reading out loud. But you can see that we just want kids that are capable of keep going back and persevering through the end. Another one of our goals is empathy. We want our students to recognize that actions create reactions in other people, and that they need to be sensitive to what other people are thinking and understand that different people are living different lives. So you can keep going, David. These are all in this, and you guys have a copy of it so that you can read through these more intensely. I think we've gone through these once before. So communication. Whoop, you went too fast, David. Okay, communication. So we want our students to be able to communicate both in the school and then when they get out into the outside world. That's critical to success in today's world. We definitely need kids that can apply critical thinking and understanding the bigger picture. And then also kind of to have their own internal feedback loop of, I can improve on this, or that didn't work, I can try this other technique to get there. So, okay, we can keep going. And then integrity. We thought that it was important for our students to have core values that represent appropriate choices and behaviors. And to align those values with the way that they act. So keep going. So this kind of gets to some of the ultimate goals. So those were the core competencies that came out. But for those of you that weren't part of the process, they kind of miss, they don't miss, but I just felt like we need to highlight some of the main topics that were constantly talked about during the development of that portrait. And those were that we need to get kids to drive the learning. That's really important for student engagement. If we're forcing information into a kid, a lot of kids just don't care. We really want to foster curiosity. And again, if we're just forcing random information into a kid, then the kid is not capable of asking questions of what they're interested in. And the Mike from Battelle for Kids mentioned the phrase unconventional freedom in our discussion this weekend. And we want, through the strategic plan process, we want to allow freedom that we don't feel like is in the system right now. And that's the freedom to let the kids choose their own pathways, for us to step back and say, okay, we're going to miss a little bit of this content, but you're going down that rabbit hole, and that's a great place to go. And you're going to learn by learning about stuff that's important to you. So kind of taking a step back and letting the kids choose their own path. And at the same time, allowing teachers to have some freedom from the standardized test-driven curriculum, to allow teachers to say, we have to take the standardized tests, but I think that this is more important, and I think that you as students will be more engaged in this other avenue. We want to get away from content delivery and towards a learning to learn, which is critical because our world is changing so fast. These kids need to come out knowing how to learn after we've taught them. We want autonomy within the system. We want to move to a system where teachers are the coaches, where they're no longer driving the content, but they're teaching the kids how to learn on their own. And then we need to break down barriers to learning and engagement. And that's, you know, all of those kind of point to the same thing. We want to break down the system that we have now and create something a little bit more freeing. So keep going. So that kind of highlighted all of the discussions over a 5-month period in a very quick 4 or 5 slides. So now this was back in March, April, transitioning from the portrait of a graduate work towards the strategic plan development. So one of the things that was interesting is we were no longer meeting in person, and we were meeting as we are now. And about 30% of our membership of the design team turned over, which actually was really helpful to have some new voices who just absorbed the portrait that was already prepared, not knowing what any of the previous conversations were, and to come in and pick up with different thoughts and different ideas. So Battelle for Kids conducted a current state analysis, and there were 2 main parts of the current state analysis. They reviewed a ton of documents from the SU and from all the districts. And as a board member, I was not privy to all of that. David could talk more, but from what I understand, it was pretty much everything they could get their hands on that pointed to how the SU and the districts operate. So that was one part of it. And then the other part was an analysis of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So there was a survey, and then there was an analysis meeting with the design team. So it was about 2 hours of back and forth and small breakout groups. So those two parts of the current state analysis became the main driver for the development of the strategic plan. So moving on.
Nikki?
Yeah.
John might have raised his hand.
Oh, Sean? Go ahead, Sean.
No, I want to make sure that you get through, but when you made that transition from the portrait of a graduate, I just wanted to note there were some very serious implications of that, and nobody raised their hand to ask about it, including the role of the essential philosophy of students guiding their own learning would be a major change in what we endorse. So nobody objected. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone noticed that was a major, that's a major issue.
Thanks, Sean. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but I strongly encourage you guys to go through this presentation, because I tried to pull all of the work into a short, digestible set of slides. So there were a lot of strengths within our community. We have some examples of innovation. We've got strong established leadership. We've got some good community engagement. And we've got a lot of coordination going on between the districts. And I'm going to miss some that are important to you guys, so I'll let you read them for a second. But there are some things that we're doing well. And again, the homegrown and celebrated food department is definitely a strength of ours. So those are the things we don't want to lose, or we didn't want to lose in developing the strategic plan. So you can go forward, David. I will read the weaknesses, because these are the things that we're striving to improve. Our student achievement is modest as far as conventional measures value it. We have declining student engagement. We have a bit of a staff attendance problem. We don't track our post-secondary outcomes very well. We don't know what our students are doing after graduating. Scary is that we don't have a purpose for why we're educating those students. They did an analysis of the communication that went out to parents as far as like our student handbook. And it was horrific. If you read that student handbook, and we all actually do, you feel penalized just by reading it. It's very negative. And then our graduation rates could be better. Keep going. So these are things we want to improve. There's some opportunities. There's federal legislation that's looking to give students more authority. There's this pandemic has allowed us to have an increase in flexibility of teaching and learning conditions, and kind of a relaxation of, we didn't have testing last year, so we were allowed to relax a little bit on some of those drivers that some of us might deem unnecessary. The national unrest has allowed us to question things locally, and through the portrait process, we've realized that there's agreement about some of the key points of education, and the students are ready for change. The youth is ready. So moving on to threats, that our concept of success might be too narrow. We know that our enrollment trends are scaring all of us. Nationwide, and I've heard particularly in New England, there's declining mental health around youth, and that's something that we talk about all the time. Behavioral problems in the schools, and then we don't know what's going to happen with funding, and the pandemic has made it even worse. And community and all of us that went through the standard system tend to embrace the standard system and status quo. So So keep going, David. So from there, all of those threats and weaknesses and strengths and opportunities, the Battelle for Kids group kind of distilled all of those into 4 strategic plan goals. And these are big, lofty goals that are going to take a lot of work. It's exciting work, but it's also a little intimidating and scary. So student success, we've talked about this. We really want to take the constraints, take away the constraints to learning, let students drive their own learning, be engaged, and really be part of it. We want to improve our culture and instill a culture of freedom and voice for all, but particularly for teachers and staff. We feel like teachers and staff have lost their voice and their freedom. And I think people teach best when they're excited about what they're teaching. So we want to create a safe space for them to be vulnerable and grow. Student wellness and engagement is critical. And this is one, the student success and culture pretty much shows up in all of the Battelle for Kids plans, because that's why we're here. But student wellness and engagement particularly came to the top for us specifically. We want to integrate, we talk about educating the whole child. We want to integrate that and include mental and social and emotional health education. And we want to give kids the voice in their learning choices, because that'll keep them engaged. And then information and communication. I made the example of the handbooks earlier. We want to make sure that external communication is intentional. Like, we haven't told our community why we're educating our kids. What's the purpose of that? And so we need that to convey an appropriate meaning, and we need to develop better systems to manage the information that we're gathering in the schools. So that was a big picture. I think there's one more slide before I'm done. And then the themes of how we're going to do that, that drove writing the plan. The first one is teacher voice. We want to make sure that it's not just the administration. It's what's happening in our schools is not the administration saying you need to do this, but teachers saying we want to do this. And then student voice. We really, through this plan, we want to break down the way things are going now and allow students to be a big part of changing how the school works. So, getting them more motivated, using their capacity, letting them drive some of the curriculum priorities, and just revisit the role of educators in student learning. So from all of that information, there were 10 self-selected volunteers from the design team, and they were great. When I saw the list, I was super excited. And I think you can tell, for those of you who have read the strategic plan, you can tell that a lot of work went into this. So from there, I said that I would turn it over to Elizabeth to go through, we go from the goals to the objectives. So Elizabeth, you want to take over? I don't see you.
I'm here.
There you go.
Sure.
So David, you can probably stop sharing and pull up the plan.
Okay. Yep. Let me do that.
David, would you mind pulling up the strategic plan? And while you're doing that, I wondered whether anybody had any comments or points of discussion, or I know a number of you were not involved in the Portrait of Graduate process, so you may have some questions about it. Anybody?
Go ahead, Sean.
This is Rebecca. Nicole, I wanted to first of all thank you, because I had a lot of questions. As I did have a copy of the strategic plan and just had a lot of questions, and you really helped. You answered a lot of them for me. But yeah, when you talk about Portrait of a Graduate, and there were a couple of things you mentioned, and I think Sean, you had mentioned, I don't know if you mentioned that also, but the whole idea moving away from traditional content, and I wasn't sure what that would look like. What's specifically, how do you end up assessing students to make sure that they are going to be prepared once they step out of high school for the world?
I can answer to some of that, Rebecca. Several years ago, there was a law passed, Act 77, which is the implementation of personalized learning, and it's a statewide. It has required schools to look at how education is being delivered to students and to have it more student-based and allowing students to have more voice in what they're learning. And it's standards-based grading. There are a couple more points to it, but it is something that's driving changes in education across the state. And there are other states. It's not something that Vermont just kind of came up and said, oh, let's do this. It's a culmination of conversation that's been going on for quite a few years. And a really good place to get a feel for it is to go to the Nellie Mae New England Learning. They promote student-focused learning and student voice.
Okay.
So Bill?
I'm sorry, Amy. I thought you were finished. Go ahead, finish.
I am finished.
Oh, okay. I just kind of want to, put my plug in here too. I kind of started discussing and scared a lot of people probably before and a little bit after the Ascutney board merged, about looking at not just high school, but looking at approach student learning, their contact and their level of instruction, not based upon a student's age and thus their grade. Base it upon where they're at. So moving away from grade level, age level groupings, and moving more towards not ability grouping, but instruction based on what a student needs and what a student wants to learn. Because often we have students who are emotionally traumatized because they're expected to learn things that are far above their level, or they're expected to learn things that are far below their level. So that's one of my goals.
Yeah. Amy, if I could interject too, Rebecca, I think it's a great question. And quite frankly, that goal number one, student success, if you look carefully at those strategies, it pretty much wraps around your question. How are we going to measure this? How do you assess kids, right? How do you go a little bit deeper, rather than wider? So I think this first goal, and I don't know, Elizabeth, how you plan to
I'm getting there. I'll get there, David. Don't worry.
But I think that's exactly, Elizabeth. I'm sorry, Rebecca. Your question relates almost singly to that first goal.
Okay. Thank you.
So does anybody else have questions, or comments, or diatribes about Portrait of a Graduate and the the current state analysis.
I had a question.
Yes, please, Nancy.
In section 2, it said it was for the whole SU that they were going to establish a competency specific rubric for the students, for the staff, for everyone. And who makes the rubric, and just for whom is that rubric?
We're not there yet. We are still talking about Portrait of a Graduate and the current state analysis.
Okay.
If we're done talking about Portrait of a Graduate and the current state analysis, then I will move on to.
I'm sorry, I thought we were talking about the
Plan.
the plan, right?
Now we'll move on to the plan.
Is the logo? Sorry, I'm serving dessert to my kids. Is the logo something that has been adopted, or it appears a lot in what we just saw, and I have some thoughts about it. But is it something that has been adopted as part of the portrait of what we want a graduate to be?
I believe so. We had 2 meetings about it with the design team.
Okay.
We have.
The center of the picture is that dark part that you're in when you go in the bridge, and that's my least favorite part of
the logo
of entering of crossing the river, is being inside that wooden enclosure, and that's what our logo depicts, is a process that narrows into a dark tunnel that would seem to be what we're proposing as for our education system. So I'm not sure that it does represent what we want, but that's just me.
Did we lose Elizabeth?
I'm here. Hold on. I'm just writing down.
Yeah, I think that's a good note. I mean, nothing's fixed forever. I mean, we can certainly talk. We did talk a lot about that logo in small group and large group, but had multiple designs to choose from. But
can we look at the logo again, David? Can you pull that up?
I don't think anything's fixed. Yeah, hold on a second. I think I've got it in that same. Hold on a minute. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, well,
Go back to the first page, David.
Yeah, hold on. I'm going to go back. What is it? Page 1? Is that where it really? There it is.
There it is.
Yeah, it's basically, yeah. Crossing over essentially was the basic theme. The portrait to pathway. You know, we had actually applied for a big grant, and we titled the grant "Portrait to Pathway." We didn't get the grant, but that was it. You know, portrait to plan, portrait to pathway.
Maybe a boat off to the side would represent an alternative path, or a helicopter.
I appreciate that, Bill. Well played.
Yeah, I don't know if he wants one of those.
Hey, I'll admit that the scale of it is what's bothering me. It appears that we're heading out a dock onto perhaps a floating wooden structure in the middle of a lake. And if you went out the other side of the bridge, you're not going to be on the land. You're going to be
in the water.
Because the trees are too far away. So, you know, maybe some geometry students could
play with this. Work
on that.
Yeah, I will tell you, the mountain in the back was a last minute addition. It didn't have the mountain. I don't even know if it had the trees, but I think it had the trees, but not the mountain.
Yeah, and that, knowing what we know now, that looks like forest fire smoke.
Yeah, you're just stuck on the news cycle.
I'll stop at that.
Yeah.
No, I
think it would
have
be
to admit,
good.
I like Sean's point about not so much the dark part, but the fact that it is, well, Sean and Scott's point, it's looking directly in it. Would be neat to have maybe a cider view, and so that I like the idea of the path, but then, you know, paths are multiple. And that would take care of the scale in which this mystery dock that goes out to the bridge.
Yeah, we actually at one point we talked about flipping it around, but I like Scott's idea. I bet you a group of kids, a group of design students, we've got kids at the design program at Hartford Area Tech Center. We've got kids in a design program with Aaron Day. I bet they could take this and really play around with it. What better job for the kids, right?
So are we ready for a strategic plan, Elizabeth?
Yes. So as we said before, the goals and objectives of the strategic plan are designed to bring more freedom, equity, and voice to teachers and students. The priority areas are informed by strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, or as I like to call them, strengths, needs, opportunities, and threats. Because the acronym is different. So the priority areas are student success. As you can see from the very top, goal number 1, the priority goals are student success, culture, student wellness, engagement, and information and communication, which is the system itself. The goals are the top level goals are pretty broad, and the objectives are supposed to serve as entry points for the goals. The objectives also serve as indicators that the goals are being met. And they are the public-facing milestones of the 4 broad goals. One of the questions we had in looking this over is whether the language matches the intent of the goal. We don't want to change the objectives. We hoped we could identify some of the objectives or strategies or notes that we felt may have kind of problematic language. Then we could take these back to our individual boards during this month's board meetings, and then depending on how many fixes we think are necessary, reconvene to update the plan and adopt it. Because we all felt that adopting the plan as soon as possible, but thoughtfully and in a considered manner was all important. And hopefully everybody's read the strategic plan, but besides language, hopefully David Baker and Angie Ledoux can act as kind of advisors on, and the other admins who are on here can act as advisors on any potential discussion on whether we think the deadlines contained herein are reasonable or not, of course. And so as we look through these, please pay attention to how they tie back to the portrait goals and how we want them to be expressed. What do we want? What we do not want to do is rewrite everything. We want to honor the work that's already been done here by many, many people, but employ our jargon buster sense, because I think there's, in some places, it's a little bit jargony. That's not much of a presentation, but I thought we could now go through the plan. Does anybody have any questions?
just one comment, Elizabeth. I think that's a great idea. And I wonder, maybe Angie and we could talk about. Angie's a master of sort of, either a Google Doc or a comment form or some, maybe you're going to get to this, but something that would sort of put some boundaries on this work so that we could really be looking for jargon and things that just don't resonate rather than, like you said. So if we had a document, we could, then we could go to the board meetings, this month and in November.
Well, one of the things was that, it's unknown how many of these things there are. It could be that, there's 5 and we can easily get it done during our next meeting. Who knows?
Right.
One of the ones Scott brought up was that, Sean brought up was that, and I can't see it on my screen right now. And also I can't see it because the letters are too tiny, but, Sean, it had to do with,
It's
failure.
culture.
No, it had to do with failure and
I mentioned something called a failure audit.
a failure
Yeah,
audit. It was.
It's
So-
objective 3 in culture.
Objective 3 under culture.
It's a really good example, actually, because a failure audit is, it took Mike explaining what a failure audit is to allow us to understand that it's not something negative, but the language, and it doesn't have to be said that way. It could be expressed in a way that shows it as an opportunity or the creation of opportunity, but the way it's described could be better.
To be fair, to be honest, the reason I brought that up was not because of the wording, but to point out that this strategic plan contains a lot of stipulations for how for self-examination, for meta-analysis on the part of the SU. It even includes, positions like for sort of a SU-wide SEI type person who uses data to analyze how we're doing in meeting all these objectives. And so that is what I want to draw attention to, not whether we call it failure or not, but the fact that this plan stipulates a lot of self-examination.
Right.
Elizabeth.
Yes. Is that Scott?
That's me. Yeah, Scott. Yep.
Hi.
Yeah, Elizabeth and Nikki, because you're present, you're doing the presentation. Just quickly, going back to my comment, that was completely inappropriate, and it's proving it was just awful. I'm sorry that I said that about the mountain, and it's telling that I can be so insensitive when you're trying to talk about countless hours of community engagement. And I just want to be clear that that was not right. I'm sorry for everyone who volunteered to do this. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Yeah, I think that's okay, but I do think we should be careful not to try to have this be a session where we tear the strategic plan apart.
Absolutely. I don't.
Instead,
first I have heard in this is the first really engagement that I've taken in the process. It's just terrible that I would make an awful wisecrack like that.
No, not at all. But I think that that's part of the thing, Scott, is that you haven't. I mean, we realized in the doing that, I think it was only the board chairs that took part in Portrait of a Graduate, and there's never really been a presentation of what we did, and there was a lot of people and a lot of time, and so in order to continually honor the effort that was put in, we should, hold it up.
Well, I am sincerely hopeful, and I have also read some about the process, and you told me about it at last year's VSBA meeting in Fairleigh, and so I do have much regard for everyone who is involved, and I need to do better at listening.
Yeah, I wouldn't be too hard on yourself, Scott. I think part of what the board has to realize is that, I think you do have to have a conceptual approval ultimately of the overall plan, but so much of this, including, as Sean said, the examination part, there's a lot of examination and self-reflection in this. A lot of that's going to be done, including some of those positions, I think will be done by, the administrative team, staff members. I think that it's not, I think the board needs to be invested. And I think as we enter into the budget process, and I'm sure Elizabeth's going to talk about this, we can talk about some of this. But I think essentially where the board will play the biggest role, well, first of all, be budgeting so that we get up for this, but also in the assessment piece, I would expect at least maybe 3 times a year or twice a year, we'd be looking at those indicators we develop in goal 1, and the board would be making some determination as to whether or not it's working. And also to get rid of the jargon. I do think that's a great idea.
I wanted to, Elizabeth, I'll turn it over to you in a second, but as people review the document, it's very overwhelming. I'll admit, it's 10 pages long. There's a lot to get through, and it's dense. And to help everybody, the important part, so the goals are really set. We have 4 goals, and that was really set by the whole portrait and design team process. The objectives come out of that and are the things that were the drivers of how we can change our system. And so we really need the board to approve the objectives. The strategies, that gets into the weeds. That's where we start to transition from our role as board members to the administrative team. And so the strategies are really theirs to pick up and own. And the notes are to help guide all of us through this process. But particularly the notes are there to help the administration work through the strategies to meet the objective. So I kind of wanted to let people know that flow a little bit, because that helps in reviewing it, so that as board members, it's not as overwhelming when we're looking at the strategies, because we have professional experts that can help us with that.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it, Nikki. I like that. The objectives are critical, the goals and the objectives from a board perspective.
Yep. So let's start by just reading out loud through the objectives, just the column on the left. WSESU will create a learning framework that guides the implementation of deeper learning from pre-K through 12th grade, as evidenced by the framework presented to the superintendent by June 2021. I'm sorry, can you go back up to number 1, please, David? I almost feel like it could just say that could leave out the as evidenced by the framework presented and just say I'm not sure what as evidenced by the framework is there for.
Do they all have evidence attached to them? I think they do. I think it's just the way you're going to measure.
Yeah. Can I speak?
Yeah, go ahead, Angie.
So that is how we know that we've done it. So the evidence that we've done it is that the framework has been presented.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm not sure that should say superintendent. Maybe it should say board or, something like that. I mean, it certainly would come to me first, but yeah. And by the way, that learning framework is a critical part of the assessment piece, and it's something that's been on our agenda, the administrative team's agenda, for a while, trying to get a learning framework so that we have, a clear vision of where we want to go and how we want to measure it, which is sort of leads to number 2.
Okay, let's just read through them. Number 2, WSESU will create an assessment system supportive of the students' deeper learning by July 2022, as evidenced by the plan submitted to the superintendent. Okay, number 3, WSESU will create an inventory of extended learning opportunities for grades pre-K through 12 by July 2023, as evidenced by the inventory shared with the superintendent.
Like I said, I think you could probably change superintendent to board, because ultimately the board is pretty much, overseeing the objectives.
Can you keep going down, please, David?
Now we're under culture goal 2.
Okay, culture goal 1. WSESU will develop a portrait of an WSESU member. I'm just going to pronounce it WSESU because it's easier to pronounce, as shared with the superintendent by July 2023. WSESU will design a plan to provide professional development about best practice collaboration, as evidenced by the plan being shared with building principals by July 2022. WSESU will design a plan for an annual Big Ideas Summit to explicitly build into the SU's annual calendar a recurring process of innovation by July 2023. That's where the conduct a failure audit is. WSESU will conduct a diversity audit to determine if gaps exist between SU policies and practices, the WSE portrait, and a healthy culture. First audit report to the board by July 2022. Where's the...
Goal 3.
Goal 3, objective 1 is WSESU will create and fund a student mental health and emotional leader position to guide SU actions for the SU, school, and classroom support of student mental health by June 2022. Student voice and choice will be operationalized at the SU school and classroom levels as evidenced by a report to the SU board by June 2023. Okay, keep going.
I was going to say, in those strategies, you'll see a lot of examples of how that could be done.
WSESU will institute flexible pathways for middle school through graduation as evidenced by board action on the proposal of these pathways by June 2021. That's the end of this school year.
Well, that might be a little aggressive, but given the condition of where we are.
WSESU will decide how to implement the concept of student advisory boards at school and SU levels so that a representation of the respective student population can inform how their education looks and feels as evidenced by an implementation report to the superintendent by June 2024.
And there are also good models of those student advisory boards.
Elizabeth, my internet kicked out and I missed a little bit of the beginning, but I did have a question, and I'm a little confused with the dates that were listed on the strategies form, and I wasn't sure, or at least it wasn't clear to me if they were implementation dates.
Yes, those are the deadlines. So they should be finished by those dates.
Finished. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Those are not start dates, those are end dates.
End dates, all right.
Some of them are fairly aggressive too, but so where are we? We're on goal 4.
WSSU will identify an information and communications officer for the SU to guide the work of this area by June 2023. WSSU will identify a data leader to guide and support the information needs of the SU by June 2023. WSSU will develop a plan for informing and reporting the progress of this strategic plan as evidenced by a presentation to the WSSU board by June 2024. I feel like we should have more times to understand the progress of this strategic plan between now and June 2024. But let's finish reading all of them and then we can come back.
I think that might have referred to the final report, but I'm sure there'll be interim reports.
WSSU will develop a systematic collection of student interests as part of its regular collection of student data to inform educational programming and personalization of students' learning experiences by June 2024. WSSU will conduct a review of all major sources and pieces of SU and building level communication to validate that it conveys the priorities and tone of its values today by June 2024.
That's a final report too.
Would you mind just quickly sticking that Angie's wonderful
timeline?
Spreadsheet of dates. Yeah, timeline or spreadsheet of dates.
Let me see if that link is live. I think, hold on a second. I think it is.
Yeah. This I found to be really helpful in looking at the strategic plan because you can see how the years, not only how the years pan out, but you can click on, I think you can click on a
goal.
On a goal.
Like that.
Yep. That was a really good spreadsheet, Angie.
You got a lot of points from Elizabeth on that one, Angie. Because she was going to have
points from.
Maybe we should have started with the spreadsheet, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It is a good sheet, though. It's a good way to track.
Would you mind going back to the 5-year span, David? Okay, so there you can see on the timeline each of the goals there on the left. The portrait of a graduate goals are there on the left.
It looks like those are clickable too, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I see. Yeah. So let's go back to the 5-year. Yeah. So this just puts it in a timeline spreadsheet form or a.
Yep.
You could also, as we ran through this, you could see the 3 positions that Sean referred to. There's a data one, there's a social emotional coordinator, and then there was one other one. I don't remember what it was, but
Communications.
communications director, right? And again, just so I think that we don't necessarily have to look at those as they could be new positions, but I think they are much more likely to be people like, I know we already have a couple of people training around communications, and so just so you know that part.
What do you mean by that, David?
In other words, we've got some folks who are we've got 1 or 2 people who are one of them is in the IT department. Ryan Dow has been working with a group of because he's right now our website manager, but there's some thought that could be expanded to, and I'm not saying Ryan would be the man, but I mean he's I know that he's been attending a couple of sessions on how to communicate the initiatives within your school district in a better way, in a more efficient way, in a more effective way. I'm not saying again that Ryan would be the one, but he's been one that's been looking at that.
Well, I think that what that position says to me is somebody who is responsible for all messaging and the tone of messaging, so that they look at your blast emails before they go out. They
Right.
look at things before they're posted to the website, and they make sure that everything is all
Right.
tone throughout. They look at the handbook, and they try to make sure that things have a tone that reflect our
Correct.
intent.
Content and tone, right?
Okay, would you mind going back to the strategic plan? Okay, I'm sorry, but I cannot see anybody, and I wondered maybe if I go over here.
Maybe
So
enter something in the chat box if they want to speak.
does anybody have any questions or things that they would like, points of clarification? One of mine was it had under the culture, number 4. So goal number 2, point number 4, it said conduct diversity audit by 2022. And I wondered whether that deadline was smart, since we, is this deadline based on the amount of time required to develop and implement curriculum? And should it be coordinated with righting wrongs?
Yeah, that stood out to me right away. Just on whether the timing would work.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Well, we just want to make sure that, again, we have all these different things going on at the same time. We want to make sure that if we can purposefully line some of them up so that they, their meaning has more depth, and
Sure.
Also we honor the work that everybody's trying to do. So, like, WSESU will conduct a diversity audit to determine if gaps exist between SU policies and practices. I kind of feel like we're going to be doing that with righting wrongs. And so maybe July 2022 is only a partial deadline.
I would agree with that.
Does anybody else have any other areas that they'd like to have addressed?
Amy, I'm sorry, Elizabeth, what do you mean by a partial deadline?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask too.
I was going to say that, it seemed to me, I guess my first question is that given the amount of time that it takes to create and then implement a curriculum, 2022 seems really reasonable. But the other parts of the deadline, the other parts of that objective could be explore the need for a DEI statement. I don't know what that means actually, but the other parts, the conduct a diversity audit to determine if gaps exist between the document the need and experiences with WSSU alumni about their interactions with diversity. So I think some of these other things will be kind of addressed during the course of this, but maybe that'll take 2 years as well. Who knows?
Well, I think the work we do with righting wrongs will just be part of that strategy leading toward, success with number 4. But I think you're right. I think that might have been what you were meaning by partial. Some of this doesn't all just get done in one shot.
Right.
But you don't want to duplicate work either. I think that if we've got righting wrongs and a real serious effort to look at our issues related to diversity, equity, and inclusion with righting wrongs, then that goes right with this goal, and we embrace it. The other thing I wanted to say is I like what Nikki said. I think in terms of what we do next month when we bring this to the board, I think if the boards could focus on the objective column, I thought that was a good point, Nikki. And much like Elizabeth just did, and just reflect on is it jargony, or the ways we could word it where it would be clearer, and then also are the timelines realistic or reasonable. That doesn't mean you can't comment on the other parts of the report, but I think that's where I agree with Nikki. I think that's where the board should focus. And if everybody reviewed those at their individual board meetings this month, then when we come back, we could have a robust conversation about whether or not we're even close to adopting this plan.
Well, we wondered whether it would be possible to have one more meeting one extra meeting after our individual boards and before the next SU meeting.
Could you repeat that? Say that again?
Have one extra meeting after our individual board meetings and before our next SU meeting is what we were talking about, so that we could try to have all of the discussion about it, at least, if not adopt it before or at our next SU meeting, so that we could kind of knit it together with the budgeting process.
Yeah, I think that's doable.
Elizabeth, are you talking about all the SU people or the strategic plan portrait team?
I think we were talking about the SU board.
Okay, so everyone?
Sort of a meeting, yeah. So have the board have the individual board meetings next month, and then try to have a meeting before the next,
where we bring all of our changes and adaptations and whatnot.
Right.
It gets a little tight because Heartland's the 16th and then the SU board is the 23rd. So there's only.
So Mount Scottney is the 9th. Wethersfield is the 10th. Heartland is the 16th. And then the SU is the 23rd. Now there happens to be a 5th Monday in November. So, we could have that meeting on the 23rd, the SU meeting, which would be after, that could be dedicated to sort of the feedback from the boards. And then
And then another one after that, we could do that.
and then meet on the 30th.
Would anybody object to that strongly?
No, I think that would be good that we had a meeting that was dedicated to discussing the strategic plan. And that way we're not feeling rushed to get through the agenda and to allow people to have kind of express their thoughts and concerns about it.
And then the other piece we're going to talk about with Ed is the SU budget piece. But I think if we had that meeting to discuss the plan at the SU level on the 23rd, we could we could maybe do a little bit of budget work that night too. I mean, we wouldn't want to do a lot of it. I was thinking that with the budget work, and I'm not trying to deflect here or to go on a bird walk, but because we weren't ready to present tonight, I thought, and we've done this before, that maybe the preliminary draft presentation of the budget, we kind of work that through with the board chairs, virtually, and then maybe on the 23rd, just give the outline, because really it's about how that affects your assessments. But I think I guess my point is having 2 meetings in November is a good idea. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
I would prefer it if we could get the budget in advance of the meeting so that we can ask questions at the meeting.
Right. Yeah, which is why we were clearly not ready tonight. But yeah.
When we organized, didn't we have a budget committee?
We did. Well, at that point, the board chairs acted as sort of the subcommittee on budget. And
I remember having somebody besides me on the budget.
Maybe it was somebody besides. I know we had a subgroup.
I'm looking at that person who's raising their hand.
And I'm okay doing it that way again.
I made promises.
And for the record, I said no about something.
She did say no about something, but then David's trying to bring her in anyway.
Yeah, exactly. No, the administrative team, the central office administrative team needs about another week, meaning this week. I mean, we could be ready by middle of next week to present to a subcommittee.
When do we want to get these 2 things approved? We're trying to fit it all in by next meeting, and we're trying to approve this document and
the idea
together with the budget.
Yeah, the idea is that we adopt this after careful consideration. We adopt this strategic plan, but sooner rather than later. So it's asking a lot of board members to actually get the work done. It's a meaty document. It's 10 pages long, and we recognize that, but it'll be worth it because it'll guide the budgets and the activities for the next several years. And if we kick it down the road, it won't be as active of a document. We will have missed the chance to have it interact with our budget process this year and
Yep.
All that's entailed in that.
Yeah, and again, I think the folks who worked, really hard on this, the design team, the writing team, the administrative team, there's a lot of players involved. I think if we could get this approved by the first of the year, we would be happy so that we could enter into 21. But I think Elizabeth's goal of trying to have this, and she and I have had some lively conversations about whether or not that's possible this year, to really take a document that hasn't quite been completely adopted. But I mean, I think any of our 3 districts, including the SU, could still use this document in draft form to guide the budget process. So in that respect, I agree with Elizabeth. But I think, next year when we're going to a budget process, this should be the absolute guiding force. But
Yeah. Excuse me. Sean asked a question of who ultimately, what board approves this plan. This strategic plan is the Windsor Southeast Supervisory Union strategic plan. So as representatives of our individual boards, we will be taking into consideration the discussions that we had at our individual board level and bring it to the SU at the meeting on the 23rd. Would you agree, Elizabeth?
Yes, yes.
and then what would happen, just to be clear here, is every single building or district, and Angie, correct me if I'm wrong, has to write a continuous improvement plan, right? That's building based. And you'd like to think that this framework or strategic plan would guide that continuous improvement plan in the local districts. Do I have that right, Angie?
Yes, the way that our continuous improvement plan worked in the past is we did an SU level one, and then the elements, the SU level one serves as a sort of like a framework, and then the individual schools write their sub goals so that we can see how they are related to the SU plan. It's the same idea.
Yeah. So just to summarize, in November at our board meetings, we'll make sure this plan is on every agenda. We'll specifically be paying attention to the draft objectives, and the goals and quote unquote the jargon. Boards will spend a little time discussing this at the individual level. Then we'll come back on the 23rd with board feedback. And that meeting will be dedicated primarily to the plan, with maybe an introduction to the FY22 SU budget in there somehow. Then we'll meet again on the 30th to continue with our regular agenda items and more specifically more detailed discussion on the budget. Does that sound right?
That sounds right to me, David. I have a question about what happens to the strategic plan after that. You said it goes, it informs the continuous improvement plan. Is the strategic plan something that will be posted to our SU website so that the public can see it? And can we post Nikki's PowerPoint presentation to the website so the public can see it? And
yeah, I like that. And the other thing, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I guess it's our SU's strategic plan, but what happens to it? That's what I was wondering.
Yeah, no. And a matter of fact, I think that speaks directly, sort of looking from the reverse end of this. I mean, I think the sooner we put together, I'm scrolling down here. Sorry about that if I'm making everybody dizzy, but I'm trying to get to goal 4, right? I think improving the quality and effectiveness of the two-way communication, so stakeholder, blah, 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 right? I think that it's going to be critical to this will be a great way to start communicating well. We could break out an objective, and in layman's terms, and we'd need some help with that. I mean, whether or not that's a team that does that, but I think that introducing the plan to our community, our SU community, the purpose of the plan, and then breaking down these objectives, I think would be a great place to start improving communication.
I also think that we need to communicate this to the public because it's a different way of looking at schooling. And we need to bring the public in on that. And it also, by introducing it to the public, holds our feet in the fire. Did we make progress? And we need to do that.
We
Yes,
talked.
exactly.
Go ahead, Amy.
Because there were 65 plus people who put a lot of work into Portrait of a Graduate, and to show that we are using that information to create a strategic plan, which will then inform our budgets, that is showing that we took seriously what our community presented to us through Portrait of a Graduate.
Well said, Amy.
Yeah.
My only thing is that if this is going to be a public facing document, that it has a lot of, not jargon, but it's a little wonky. That's all.
I would say that the public only needs to get to the goals.
Yeah, I think the goals and the objectives. Yeah.
Yeah, and I
Maybe-
don't even know that I would spend a ton of time on the objectives. I think they need the goals.
A simplified version of the objectives.
Yeah.
I agree, Nikki. I think we can talk through that and talk through the, yeah, I agree. But again, that's that communication team that we might want to put together early in the process, and use some of the folks from the design, some of those folks that sat in who were on the design team to help us bring this out to the community. I think that would be helpful.
And at a certain point, after we have adopted the strategic plan, we can determine perhaps on a monthly basis to have David or Angie or someone present where we are on a particular objective. How are we meeting one of the strategies? Where are we? So that every month our public can either tune in to what's happening with the strategic plan, or read the minutes, or at least know that it's not sitting on a shelf somewhere.
Yeah. And like I said earlier, some of these things didn't just come out of nowhere. I mean, had COVID not hit, Angie was going to begin the work on developing the learning framework and put that leadership team together. And then we got smashed with, March hit, and that was the end of it. But there's no reason we can't virtually do some of this.
Can I say something? I do think that we have to be, and I know the board members appreciate the capacity issue that we're running into with people, and what it takes to do work like this. What small chunks can we do that's reasonable, that won't push us right over the edge? I am quite aware of the stress that our families and students are under. So therefore, their staff, our teachers and our administrators are under, feel it. So, and I think I've said before, at least to the chairs, that our small supervisory union means that we end up having the same people work on teams to do this work. And a lot of those people that did this work might be teaching in a classroom this year for the first time. I can think of several that usually don't teach in a classroom, like they do support. They're interventionists. So anyway, it's just something to be thinking about in terms of what really is our capacity for doing this work, and what little pieces can we do to help us, make us feel like we're moving forward, but don't overwhelm us so that we get discouraged.
Right.
Angie and David, is it possible that you can provide some of those who tend to volunteer and sometimes get burnt out because they're the ones that are always volunteering? Is it possible to consider if they want to continue with the work, a stipend of some sort. It really try to honor the fact that they are willing to go through the work even during this very difficult time. It's just something that I want to throw out, because it just seems like a lot of work has gone into this document. It's a pretty powerful document, and you don't want to lose footing. You want to keep going, and even in the midst of these challenging times. And but I hear what you're saying. It's we just want to really appreciate that it is a challenging time, and it is really uncertain for so many folks. And how do you move forward?
Angie, with what Rebecca just suggested, I mean, is that a legitimate investment for the CFP to have that framework, leadership team?
When it could be, I'll say it could be. I've just never written one written an investment for our in our CFP for teacher stipends for that kind of work, but I think it is possible. So I'm not saying no. We don't have our carryover yet in our grant. So right now our grant is bare bones, but I do anticipating getting I know that there were things last year that we did not spend our grant funds on, and so that should be carrying over. I'm happy to look into that to see how I can make that happen. Yeah. It's probably usually around this time, we know what our carryover is. It usually comes in at about the 3rd or 4th week of October, at least it did last year. So I don't know if they're also slowed down at the agency. And so it might be a month or so before an amendment is put in. I just want to share that last year we offered stipends for a team to work on proficiencies, on identifying. Actually, we used work from another school district. The team agreed that work was okay. The administrative team, and then the team of teachers looking at the work agreed that we would use this other school district's work, and we would just look at it and to see what we needed to tweak. Why reinvent the wheel, kind of thing. Right. And I think we met 3 times before COVID hit, and then after that, we certainly could have met, but people just it didn't happen. So I do think offering a stipend, Rebecca, is does send the message that this work is important. I'd have to work with David if we couldn't get grant funds, how we would actually do that. Last year, we worked that stipend out with our principals. So, thank you.
It's a good suggestion. All right, so I think we have a plan. We'll get it on each board agenda as part of a discussion item. Then we'll come back on the 23rd as an SU board with the thought that we will probably have another meeting on the 30th of November to do the other SU items. And in the meantime, we're going to need to do the budget too, but we'll wait till we get to budget, which we promised Ed we were going to do at the beginning of this agenda. So I think we forgot that. I don't know if, I assume Ed's still here. But
yeah, I'm hoping that Ed is still here.
He's here. I see his name.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm still here.
It occurred to me as we started talking about strategic plan that you were going to give us just a quick little financial overview before we move on to anything else. And I apologize for not doing that.
Are we good on this?
That's okay.
Go ahead, Ed. Sorry.
Go ahead. All right. A quick overview. Let me give you an idea of where we are in terms of budget development. The way the SU board works, or SU budget works, is the most important piece in the beginning is simply getting the service plan from the special ed director, which we have, and it has been submitted to the state, which is great news. So I got the service plan last night, essentially, and I've been working on trying to put that into a format that could translate into the actual budget. So once I get that in there, what I need to do after I get that in there is to try to figure out what that service plan will generate in reimbursement from the state. So there's three components to the reimbursement. The first one is the regular expenditure reimbursement. So essentially all the eligible expenditures in special ed are eligible for 56.25% this year reimbursement. Then there's costs associated with extraordinary students. So if there's a student that's high cost, those students are they get a reimbursement for after we've spent $60,000. Any cost after $60,000 are reimbursed at 100%. And then the third component is state place students, and those students, if they meet the criterion of the AOE special ed rules as a state place student, the cost associated with those students is reimbursed at 100%. So I break down the service plan in that format. I have the service plan, and it does outline who the extraordinary students. What I spent today doing is try to figure out from that who the state place students were, so that I could break out the three components of the reimbursement. When I get those three numbers together, I take the overall cost of the service plan, which is essentially the total cost for special education. And then I take that number, the total number of the special education budget, and I subtract out the estimated reimbursements. And from there, I just take that number and I use equalized pupil from this year to generate the assessments for special ed back to the school districts. And because special ed is such a large component of the assessments, I asked David and Katie if they could meet with me to talk about some of the assumptions I'm making on this. And that's why I asked them if we could wait on trying to give you numbers, because I have several questions, and it's difficult to get David and Katie in the same room. So that's where we are right now.
So we're going to make that a priority, and just, I think we can do that this week. I talked with Katie this afternoon. She's aware of the issues. And one of the things we'll talk about is that special education, which translates to a big part of your supervisory union assessment, really, as Ed just said, is made up of those two factors. It's the expenditures. It's also that state reimbursement that comes back to the FU, and your assessment for your local towns is the expenditures minus that state aid. So we have to be as accurate as we can, even though it's still a shot in the dark on what that state aid is going to be. And that's why we need to sit down and
I can tell you, for instance, that at this point, the special ed budget is $7,335,000. $7,715,355, and that's about a 2% increase over the budget this year. Now, one of the things that what David's outlining is so say that one of the goals of the SU was to build capacity for students in-house, so that we didn't have to have a lot of out-of-district placements. Well, that's an admirable goal. One of the results of that could be that although the budget is 2% larger, you could see an increase in your special ed assessment, because the weight of the reimbursements changes. So say more of the expenses are now covered under the 56.25 rather than the 60%. Okay, so if you have a high cost student, his or her costs are covered up to 56.25%, up to $60,000, and then after $60,000, you get 100% back. But if you're keeping the students in the district and you're not paying tuition, there's not going to be as many students going into that extra over and above the $60,000 threshold because you're not paying tuition. So the capacity that you're building into in-house is going to be more, is going to require more money to get the people that you need in order to teach the kids so they don't have to go out of district. So that's one of the things I wanted to walk through with these guys so that I could show them what I'm seeing little by little, because I just threw the numbers together today. And I will get from the state, based on Katie's service plan, I will get from the state at the end of November, I'll actually get numbers from them that they'll say, based on the service plan, this is what we think you'll get back. And in the past, because we've been in a rush to get to these assessments, I haven't been able to use that number. So I know everybody wants to vote on this in the middle of November, but there's a cost associated with that because I don't have what the state's telling me is going to be the actual reimbursement or their estimate rather than my own estimate.
And you know what I said to Ed is this might lend itself to what we've talked about before, that we start to work on the local budgets, and before we have a final assessment on the SU budget. And not that we can make a lot of significant changes, especially to that large special ed portion, but at least the two things will be running parallel rather than rush to get an SU budget that's not based on good numbers and figures, because it's a lot of money. The special education budget, and I know Katie's worked hard to keep that service plan around 2% or just a little under 2%. It's a lot of money. That's the bottom line, and that's kind of what gets billed back. And we have been making an effort the last couple of years to keep our kids in-house. I know 5 years ago we probably had 8 or 9 students at the foundations program in right in the middle of town, and that program charges $100 to $110,000, and that's just a day program. I think now we're down to about 3 kids there. So we've been making this effort to bring kids back, but Ed points out a very stark reality that when you bring those kids back, you don't get as large a reimbursement back from the state. So it's a two-edged sword, really, when you look at this. But we want to be accurate when we bring you those numbers.
The other thing is for the central office, what I've been, as the state continues to want us being the SU offices to bring in centralized cost, transportation is now going to be paid out of the supervisory union. So when you do see the central office, it's going to increase significantly because you're going to take transportation out of your local budgets and put it at the SU. And that will become a assessment back to the schools.
But it's coming out of your local budgets. It's not going to be in your local budget. And that's a state requirement now. We probably should have been doing it last year, but we're going to get it done this year.
So that's where we are right now in terms of the development, and I expect that if David and if we can sit down in one room and look this thing over and talk about it, I think we could have something to you very quickly, or at least in the next week or two.
Yeah, we'll get something out. The other piece you did, Ed, I saw you sent out the quarterly or at least some figures in terms of where we are for this year in the supervisory union. I got that. I was going to put it up on the screen, but I can't rotate it. So we'd all be like turning our heads to the side. So maybe Ed, you could just tell us, quickly I think it went out today in an email from Ed, but where we sit as a supervisory union for this fiscal year.
'Cause I can certainly send that out to everybody once I get the list of everybody who's at the meeting. I'll send it out. I finished that at like 4:30 tonight, but yeah, so it's still pretty early, but the SU is running, the special ed budget is about 10% in the black. The central office is about $25,000 in the black, and early childhood is running right about even. But again, I mean, one of the things that I'm seeing at the SU one of the things I'll have to credit Kate with is that as we go forward with special ed, we're being able to do more purchase orders, which is important because we get the total cost of that service or that whatever it is that they're buying. If they give us a purchase order, it's for the year. Rather than paying based off of invoices, we're getting actual purchase orders that are annual. So that actually loads in what you guys remember as encumbrances. So I don't have to guess anymore how much they're going to spend for services like psychological services that are contracted or, occupational therapy. We've got a system now in place that it's slowly but surely happening where we've got it down to where we can get that stuff in soon enough so that they're more accurate when we put them out there. But even with that, they're still, when I say 10% of the budget, it's $700,000 in the black right now as of the end of September. So that's special ed.
Yeah, and I'm sorry. I thought Ed did send me that email late this afternoon. I thought it went out to everybody. That's my mistake, but we'll get that out to everybody. But Ed's right. It's we're in the black right now, and again, it's early, and the revenue numbers are only projections. But we're expenditure-wise, I think we're running in the black by about $770,000. So early, but good news from a supervisory union standpoint. Ed, if we ended up, I know I've asked you this before, Ed, if we ended up with a large surplus at the end of the year, let's just pretend optimistically that this $700,000 stays with us, or maybe it drops to $500,000, but we have a $500,000 SU surplus at the end of the year. Does that just go back to the towns, or do you use that as a prepay for next year's assessment? Would that help them with the local budget next year? How does that work?
No, it's a cost. The assessments are based for this year are based in 21. So if there was a surplus, it would go back to schools. So essentially, if say special ed came in at $500,000, in the black, what I would do is I would use the same formula I used to send out the assessments to credit the assessments back.
Okay.
So it would help the budgets. It would help their budgets out in the fiscal year that it was in. So if that happened in FY21, it would lower their special ed, which would follow the bottom line in their local budgets.
Okay. So we'll get that quarterly out to everybody in the next 24 hours because it was pretty readable to me. So I thought it went out to everybody. Any other questions for Ed? And then I guess the only other question, and Nikki, you mentioned it. Do we want to, like I said, we can be ready in a week here. Does anybody from the 3 districts want to volunteer to take a preliminary look at that with us so you can be, a little bit more conversant when we get to the larger board? I know, Colleen, you did it last year.
I do.
Okay, that'd be great, Colleen. How about Wethersfield? Anybody want to jump to that mission? Don't all speak at once.
Not me, thank you.
Sure, you've got your task. By the way, we can do this virtually. It'll be a little tricky, but I think we could do it virtually. Colleen, did you have a question?
We're going to meet and look together. Is there a document?
Yeah, we'll send out once Ed and Katie and I and we get it together, we'll send out that document. So you'll have something to look at before we meet. Anybody else on the Wethersfield board that would like to do that with us? We're a very nice group. We're a very happy group.
I do think it's important for someone to be on there, so I will volunteer.
Thanks, Sean. And again, we'll try. We can do it virtually. And then how about that would leave Albert, Mount Escutney.
I think I did it last year, didn't I?
I think, Bill, you did. Are
Yeah.
you okay doing it this year?
Yeah, I am.
All right. I mean, it's just another set of eyes. So, all right, we've got it. So we'll put something together and then get it out to the three of you first, and then out to the rest of the crew, maybe sometime next week. I think we're good.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Ed.
Thank you, Ed.
Thank you. Good night.
And I also think that it will be very exciting to have a strategic plan that will actually guide our budget discussions. It's ultimately a goal because it's our budget that speaks, that is the language of our values. What, we spend money on what we value, and it'll just be a really good thing to be able to point to our strategic plan when we present our budgets to our communities. And also that our strategic plan is based on community conversation. So thank you, everyone, for all the work.
At some point, maybe we can, and definitely not anytime soon, look at grants that might support this plan.
Yeah, the plan. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. We like I said, we wrote that big grant. We may resubmit it because I think we did well, but we didn't get it. That would have been a nice chunk of money. You win some, you lose some.
Okay, next up on our agenda, our favorite, policies. And we are looking again at our social media policy.
Yeah, and I know Bill continues to do some work this, and certainly gives plenty of credit to the foundational work that was done at the Wethersfield board a couple of years ago. But Bill, I want to thank you for staying right up until the last couple of days when he and Larry were going back and forth about just a couple of minor word changes in there that may or may not have been minor. But Bill, do you want to speak about this policy? And I think we're at final reading tonight, pretty much.
This is the final reading. And I am glad we waited, mostly because Larry was able to look at it and find some 2 points that he had that I believe we corrected and went out this morning in the new draft. Do people want me to put up on the screen the actual changes that happened since the last reading? Okay.
Or talk us through it.
Yeah, that would be helpful. Thank you, Bill.
Yeah, I have it right on the screen right now.
You are an IT guy.
The yellow portion here is what is there now. And Larry's point was that it said just content. And he said, what content? So I clarified it, and he liked it, the fact that, and it's almost a little bit repetitive, but, any content related to school, college, school community must be consistent with the work of the district. So if someone makes a comment on Act 250, that's got nothing to do with school. But if a staff member identifies them as a staff member, and then comment something related to the school or the district, those comments must be related to the district. In the next section, I have it over here. Basically, before it stated these guidelines are not designed to serve as a code of conduct for social media use and do not constitute separate basis for potential discipline. Well, the fact is, up above, we said, yes, it could be. And granted, these are meant to be guidelines. So I took that first part out, and so that it didn't conflict with the newer section we approved last time. So that this statement basically says that this policy doesn't conflict with other policies that we have. So those are just the two changes that happened. And Larry also had a really good point, and I volunteered to work on it, and I'd love to have help on it, but to make a list of examples for staff. Basically, if you do this, can I do this? Can I do this? Yes, no, yes, no. Just a very concrete example. So because he anticipates staff having questions when reading this very thorough and well-written policy, at the same time, it might be nice just to have some examples for them to go through to make it clearer for them.
Would that be kind of like a frequently asked questions regarding the social media policy?
Yes. Yeah.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
And maybe that, because it's anticipated that there will be questions, that could be part of a staff or faculty meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the next step with this.
Yeah.
It's to go district to district, building to building, but I'd like to have that FAQ document ready when we do that.
Sean?
I move that we adopt the policy as amended.
I will actually second that.
You deserve it, Bill.
Scott, I know that you had asked about VSBA. I sent this to them a while ago and they had no comment on it.
Yeah, I told Scott too, Amy. I had sent it to the attorneys. It is a little bit of a pioneer policy because there aren't a lot of folks that have one, but there were no legal implications. So I think both VSBA and our attorneys have looked at this.
So when you don't hear back from them, can you say there are no legal implications?
Yeah, no, we did hear back from them.
Okay. Okay.
And that was a while, like Amy said, it was a while ago, but I haven't sent out this absolute latest version, but it hasn't changed that much since I did send it out.
Okay, well, actually, I prepared quite a buzzkill of questions, and I wish that Bill could bring that back up. Is that something you could do, Bill?
Bring the policy back up?
Yeah.
Do you want to go right to the top, Scott?
Yeah, if you will, Bill. Thank you, David.
Is this a good size for everybody? Because I can shrink it down.
Looks good.
Works for me. Yeah, so I'm just going to go right from the top with my questions, and everybody should just jump in if they're at any point. But I'm still stuck on not wanting to add redundancy to the policy manual and wanting to empower building leaders and not entangle or encumber them with language that basically, in my mind, is kind of distrustful when there's too much procedure. So if we can recall as a group here, and we did pass the VSBA electronic communications between employees and students policy. So we have that. And so I actually have that in paper in front of me. So this isn't going to be, what we need is one of Lori's great side-by-side views, Lori Brown's. But Bill, if you could go to section 2, social media definition in your policy.
B?
Yeah.
Okay.
B, exactly. I mean, basically, our draft here is not the same definition as the VSBA definition. That seems problematic. I mean, it's 2 documents, a few, pages apart in a binder that don't define social media the same. Going on to C, Bill, here in the VSBA one, under what's an employee, C, right, applicability, right? Board members are clearly defined, called out in the VSBA. Let's call it AOE, because the AOE really owns this. The Agency of Education one that we passed is clearly points to school board members as employees. That's not clear in this draft that we're looking at tonight. Of course, we are all have responsibility here as well in this regard. Go on to D, Bill.
Well, I think just to stop at C, Scott, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that would be an easy fix, that you would just add to that list: volunteers, teachers, support staff, school board members, and administration. That's an easy fix, because I agree with you on that one. I think the first one you talked about, I just want to make a distinction between the electronic communications policy, and this is a little different. This is a social media policy, which is why I think it's a little more expansive than electronic communication. But go ahead, keep going, Scott.
Okay. Well, and I'll just pick up on that. I mean, I'm not sure. I'm having trouble with all my notes here, but David, social media is an electronic communication, and that's specifically what the AOE policy is trying to do. It's trying not to be too pointed, so that it allows building leaders and superintendents to conclude what is appropriate and inappropriate and what is
Scott,
not.
Scott, I'm gonna disagree with you on it's a very fine point. The other policy really has to do with communication, direct communication from staff members to students, not just emails. And social media has communication features, but that's not what this social media policy is about. It's not about communicating staff to students.
Okay, well, the point I'm trying to make is that every single section of our draft policy that we're looking at tonight exists within the AOE policy in a little more general form.
And again, I'm going to disagree with you, Scott, because the AOE policy has nothing to do with, there is nothing about private and school-based social media accounts and posting. It is specifically about communication from staff to students.
Okay,
This is about social media.
Let me read on that point. So in D, excuse me, what is section E in our draft policy tonight? I'm holding up in front of me a paper that is the AOE policy, and under its appropriate content heading, number 7, communications related to personal or confidential information regarding employee or students that isn't academically focused is inappropriate. So that means that it's not appropriate to be using your personal Twitter handle to do classroom communications. That makes sense. I mean, it doesn't articulate it as broadly as our draft here, but to me, that's the power of it.
Yeah, I think I might push back a little on that too, Scott. I think the AOE policy that we adopted last time, or the VSB, I forget who did that one. I think it, because it broadly defines it, it leaves a lot. I think this is a place, much like with weapons, for example, or drugs and alcohol. This is why I've supported this policy from the very beginning. I think because of, first of all, the incredible sensitive nature of social media today and the world we live in, I think administrators are almost looking for direction on this one. They don't want it to be general and wide open. I think, and we've talked as an administrative team about this. We want it to be much more specific, just because we've had a couple of incidents just in the last couple of weeks of people using Twitter handles and their personal Facebook pages and that sort of stuff. I think it'll be good once this policy, and quite frankly, we were a little limited in the last couple of weeks because we hadn't adopted this policy yet. And again, I'm not criticizing you going back and forth between the two policies, and I certainly appreciate your intent to give administrators some latitude here, but I think they want, I'm just saying, I think they want more direction in this area so that when something pops up like it did last week, we'll be able to go right in and say, no, this doesn't reflect the values and the mission of.
So David, I think having Jean Marie here last time we discussed this was a really powerful example in which she said, well, I have students who are friends on my personal Facebook account, so I can't do that. And we responded, yeah, with this policy, you wouldn't be able to do that. Yet, if you have a school-based
school account, right?
School account and want to use that to keep track of students and communicate what's going on in the school and to the community and to students, that's okay. So it's that guideline that this policy lays out that the other one we already approved doesn't touch upon.
Well, it touches upon it in that number 7 when it says communications related to personal or confidential information. And so,
but does that say anywhere that you could be friends or within a personal Facebook account or within a Twitter or anything like that? So I think I would like that to be, as a board member, really more specific what type of behavior and content on a private social media account is appropriate and what isn't, based upon a policy, not an administrative
decision.
Yes, thank you, David.
I guess what I'm concerned about is that that appropriateness demands that the SU board look this over at intervals, quite a bit less than there's a history of. Some of this stuff that got cleaned up in the last 3 years was.
Yeah, I agree.
And I don't know how you would. I don't know how you continue to really put what's appropriate in black and white in a policy unless you look at it every couple years ongoing.
Yeah, I would agree with that part, Scott, because I think that also because media changes so quickly. I mean, it's at lightning speed. So I think you're right. This might be a policy we want to even annually take a look at and make sure it's inclusive of the both professional and personal media use.
I guess I'm just trying to be practical here. I'm just not sure that it's correct or right for me to support it. Knowing that it has to that it needs so much upkeep. Put it that way. Anyways, I think there's more relations, but this isn't a good format. And thank you, Bill, for bringing that up and moving it around when I asked you to.
Well, Scott, if you want to point out other questions, I'll try to be quiet and more.
And again, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, Scott, but I think I understand, your overall, conceptual development and pushback here, because you've always been an advocate and rightly so for giving administration jurisdiction and I know you don't want it to conflict with the general VSBA or AOE approach, and I think that's why the AOE, and I think that's why a lot of districts haven't gotten into this kind of detail, because it's very complicated. But I think that our supervisory union has had enough of an experience now with social media in a variety of forms that the administration and your superintendent in particular has been asking for some direction. And I watched this policy develop in Wethersfield, and I saw some of the pushback from the staff. I mean, this is not going to be an easy policy to implement, but I appreciate what you're saying, Scott. I just think that we probably need to live with this for a year, and then, like you said, go back maybe next summer based on experience and say, how's this working out? Is it too restrictive, not restrictive enough? Is it getting us into deeper trouble, or opening up, a little more safety from a legal perspective?
Not that I want to give anyone any more work, but I think one of the points that Scott raises, which I think is important, is that you do want to review your policies on a regular basis. And I thought that it was like a 3-year cycle. You want to go through them sort of to just stay on top of them. So I just think that's probably in the best interest of everyone in the SU.
Yeah, I agree completely. And Rebecca, just for your own information, we just went through, a pretty significant audit of our policies and a complete revision. And thanks to a few board members who worked exceptionally hard on this, those policies that you see now on our webpage, and they are SU policies, and all of our buildings follow them. And we don't have any, like Heartland doesn't have a whole bunch of policies. They live by the SU policies. But I agree completely that I think we do have to have a regular revisit of these more than I think when we did the last policy review, we had policies going back to 1990. Well, I think we even had one back in the 70s. But we can't do that anymore. I do agree with that. And I know Nikki's got it on her summer agenda to work on policy again this summer. She was instrumental in that, but we'll come up with a process for that.
Ideally, the review of policy, although we're in the middle of a motion, but ideally the review of policy should happen on a regular basis, say quarterly. At a quarterly meeting, we look at 5 policies just to see where we are, if it's still pertinent, appropriate, etc., and to see if anything has been updated through AOE or VSBA, and then just have our minutes reflect that we looked at that policy. So that would be part of an agenda calendar, part of board work. This is a goal that we will look at 5 policies every quarter, something like that.
Yeah.
However, we are in the middle of a motion to approve the social media policy. Are there, Scott, did you have more comments, or does anyone else have other comments on this policy?
I don't have any more comments other than I don't want to stand in the way, and I don't claim to, of course, not to speak for all of us. I just can't get my own head wrapped around it. So I'm just going to respect the process and the other directors and abstain, I guess.
Well, thank you, Scott, for voicing your questions and continuing the dialogue about this. Are there any other questions or comments before we have the vote?
Yeah, I'd like to thank those from Weathersfield that worked so hard on this policy in the past. I have worked on this slightly, but the bones and the foundation was laid beforehand. Just wanted to throw that out there.
Thank you, Bill. I think, let me just get to the list of people. So I'm going to have a roll call vote, just so everyone is aware of kind of who is voting and how it's being done, if there are any questions after this meeting. So I'll go down the list, starting with Bill.
He pushed the leave the meeting button.
And
he might have.
I'm not sure where he went. Yeah, oh, he's back.
Go back.
I'm sorry, I pressed the wrong button.
Colleen knows exactly what you did.
Yep. Anne Marie.
Aye.
Colleen Spence.
Aye.
Elizabeth Burrows.
Aye.
Chris Garnjost.
Aye.
Mark Youngling. I hope I'm
Aye.
pronouncing your name right.
Yes, you are. Aye.
Thank you. Nancy Pedrick.
Aye.
Nikki Buck.
Aye.
Rebecca Roisman.
Aye.
Scott Richardson.
I abstain.
Okay, thank you. Sean Whalen.
Aye.
And finally, my vote, And I vote aye. So thank you. We have been working on this, well, Wethersfield introduced it a couple of years ago, and I think as an SU board, we've been working on this, geez, a long time. Maybe under a year, maybe a year, I don't know. So thank you very much. We have a social media policy, and we will, as it is implemented and presented to our staff with the frequently asked questions, we can report back, maybe in not at our next meeting, but perhaps in January or February, how things are going and how it was received by faculty and staff. So thank you for all the work. Next up, we have the drug and alcohol testing for transportation employees. And it is a second reading. Let me here we go. Okay, were there any comments or questions on?
I have a question.
Yes, Nancy.
How often is the drug and alcohol testing done?
It is, Nancy, and by the way, I did send this to our transportation company. I think I might have done that before the last meeting. It's done for everybody at the beginning of the year, and then it's randomly done throughout the year. I think Mike said on average, everybody gets tested at least, at least a couple of times over the course of the year, but it's random. So, they'll pick a date and you don't know they're coming, and that's how it works.
Good, thanks.
Any other questions on this?
Can this be considered final reading, do you think, Amy?
Let me just, our first reading was September, so this would be second reading. So yes, it could be. So without any other questions, I'll take a motion to approve the policy, drug and alcohol testing for transportation employees.
So moved.
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. Before we have the vote, any other questions, comments? Hearing none, I'll do roll call again, starting, and so these, oh, never mind. So I'll start with Bill.
Aye.
Anne Marie.
Aye.
Colleen Spence.
Aye.
Elizabeth.
Aye.
Chris.
Aye.
Mark.
Aye.
Nancy.
Aye.
Nikki.
Aye.
Rebecca.
Aye.
Scott.
Aye.
Sean.
Aye.
And I'm final vote, and I vote aye. So thank you very much. We approved 2 policies at this meeting. That's okay. Well, thank you very much. And so next on the agenda should be items for our next agenda. So we're having the meeting on the 23rd to discuss strategic plan. And then the last Monday in November. And what day is that again? I don't have a calendar right here.
It was the 30th.
Okay, thank you. So on the 30th, we will be looking at budget. We'll have an update on the anti-racism task force. And are there other items? Considering what Rebecca had asked about policies and actually setting up a board work agenda, I could put something together and we could discuss that if that would be of interest to people. I think that would make us feel that we can point to something as far as the work that we have done and accomplished, as opposed to just or trying to be more proactive on what we look at as opposed to reactive. So I will put together a timeline of board work that we can start maybe in January. Are there any other items? There'll probably be some. Yeah, David, if we could have kind of a COVID update.
I was just going to ask that, Amy. In David, I think in David's last email, he mentioned something about the staff preparing for extending school hours, and I'd really love to know more about that.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Sorry, my microphone was off. Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably, well, two things that are updates. You know, one, and I communicated both of these in an email blast to staff, parents, and I think I copied all of you on that too. One is that we're wrestling with those 5 days that have been authorized as to be non-student days, you know, if we so choose. So we just decided to use the Monday and Tuesday of Thanksgiving week, and that was in consultation with, you know, the union representatives, because a lot of this is contractual and we have to be careful how we affect that master agreement. So you saw that in the letter that I think it's the 23rd and 24th of November will be non-student days, no school, but it's going to give us an opportunity to stop and reflect on the first 10 weeks of the year, and that leads to the second point. We plan to start well, we've already started the conversation as an administrative team, and we're going to meet with the union this Friday to talk about a plan to extend the day by some amount of time. And then we thought we could maybe finish that up as part of those 2 days, professional development days. We could hopefully finalize that. Part of what works against us, and there's apparently announcements coming out tomorrow around guidance from the state and the governor's office, and I was told today by a reliable source at the AOE that this guidance will not provide a less restrictive environment, but they're actually going to be tightening up on a more restrictive environment. Now, I don't know what that means. I think it's got to do with the increase in COVID cases in this state and throughout the country over the last couple of weeks. But I also think it's got to do with some concerns around travel over the Thanksgiving holiday. We talked about that at one point and alluded to that. So I think all of what I say tonight in terms of those two plans, especially the one to extend the day, it'll be dependent on the guidance we get from the Vermont Department of Health, the Governor's Office, and the AOE. And we're always, trying to negotiate and mitigate that our schedule and our plan with that guidance. So stay tuned, and we'll certainly get something out to all of you if things were to change dramatically in the next few days. I think we do have a staff that's still working really hard to make this work. I think the administrative team would attest to that. Some of them are on the call tonight or at the meeting tonight. But I will tell you that our adult professional staff, especially that staff, and our parents too, but I would say specifically the staff, continue to be anxious about their exposure on a day-to-day basis with other staff members, with the kids, and especially those who are either vulnerable themselves or live with a vulnerable adult. So I don't know if any of the administrators want to add anything, but that's pretty much, I think, where we are right now. And I do want to emphasize the master agreement does play into this, because there are very specific language, and certainly Scott and Sean and Bill will know this, but there's very specific language about student days, the school day in our contract, and we just have to honor that language as we make these plans. But the union's been good with us because we've been consulting them.
Okay, thank you, David. And in light of the changing environment, and like the ever-changing environment, if we could have an update at our next meeting as well.
Yeah.
And if need be, all of us kind of stand by at the ready, for any sort of announcements, because we don't know. Well, we do know that things change quickly, depending on what's happening in just across the river, or, up or down, whichever community we're spending more time in. So thank you very much. Anything else for the next agenda?
I think those are the three big things: the COVID update, the budget, and the strategic plan. And we'll, between the 23rd and the 30th, we'll organize that.
Okay, wonderful. So thank you. We did not warn for executive session. I don't have anything for executive session anyway, so that's good. So I will take a motion to
Amy,
adjourn our meeting.
New business, Amy? Is there any new business? I had something, please. Are you there?
Yeah, okay.
Okay. It's not a big deal. I just wanted to reiterate something I said at the last meeting. When we were talking about doubling up SU meetings next month, it just reminded me, because I'm looking at November here, it would really be helpful to me. I don't know how other board members feel. If I knew on my calendar that there was an Ascutney board meeting on one Monday and a Wethersfield board meeting on the next, and that would help me as a board member knowing where the other meetings were. That's A. And B, I think we've got our month is kind of locked up, and I don't.
Yeah, it's a good way to put it, Scott. It's locked up.
It's occurred to me this summer with all these, and this fall with all these meetings that take this form. It finally occurred to me. I don't know why it didn't faster, but on Monday nights, when it's Heartland board meeting, my dad goes to a select persons meeting, and I go to the Heartland School District virtual meeting. And I'm thinking about community members in Heartland who have to decide which meeting they might want to attend. And that's not really serving our community. I don't know if that happens in other communities or not, but if we lock ourselves into something month after month, perhaps for the whole year, I'm not sure that really we're not really checking the equity box there, as far as making ourselves available to folks who have different schedules. So there's kind of two parts to that, okay? I wish we could share within our SU, about the meetings. That would help me. Then I just don't know if in the long run, if locking up the month. And really, all in all, it kind of, to me, it still shouts to there's just too many meetings in the district, and the way to solve that one is to become a more efficient district.
Yeah, I agree, particularly since March. And I know at the Mount Escutney School District, we have had even more meetings, perhaps. But in terms of a regularly scheduled meeting and having it unfortunately fall on the same day as your town select board, that is something when your board reorganizes that you decide when you're going to have your regular meeting. So that might be something to look into. I know in Windsor, our select board meetings are on Tuesday. So that hasn't been a consideration. And Sean just put a note in the chat that Wethersfield moved their meetings to
Tuesday,
to go along with select board meetings, so to accommodate those. So I completely agree that there have been way too many meetings, but there's also, we've been in an environment where things are changing so quickly, and there have been so many issues that have been brought to our attention that require our attention and action, that unfortunately it often means another meeting, and it often means a meeting at the last minute. And I hope that when this is over, we can all have a big party or a picnic or, just something to celebrate that we've gotten through it. And
T-shirts.
That one, I mean, the two things that I keep missing are, I keep reminding myself, and I think I mentioned to Elizabeth one time that couldn't believe 4th of July had gone by, and it's just such a marker for the summer. And then the other thing was our spring SU retreat. We haven't seen David sing a song, and we haven't sung together. And no, I mean that in all seriousness. That was a good meal and a good time. So.
Right, exactly. There are, and yeah, I think everyone is feeling a loss of in-person connection. And
Amy, if I may, Scott, we talked about that when we had the meeting about the strategic plan the other night. That's where we usually, the SU board retreat is where we usually come up with or address the strategic plan, and we haven't done that at all this year. So this is sort of the
makeshift,
bare bones, non-retreat work meeting that replaces the retreat this year, unfortunately. But
Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you, Scott. As far as having on our calendars when the meetings, other district meetings are, so that if we wanted to attend one more meeting, another district's meeting, would it be possible to send invites to all of the board members?
Yeah, I think, or one thing I could do is send the invites to the other board chairs, and you could forward those to your boards. I mean, either way, we could.
Sure. Yeah, that would be easier. Send it to board chairs.
Yeah, we're getting pretty good about. It's getting pretty regular now. It was messed up there for a while, but it's now down to the second Monday is Mount Escutney, the second Tuesday is Wethersfield. And then the third Monday is Heartland. I think that's how it works. And then the fourth Monday is the SU. And we happen to have 5 Mondays this month. But I can send out the invite. We can include the other board chairs. I think that's good. And I felt the virtual meetings have been great. And we've got 21 people still at this SU meeting right now. We would have never had that at an in-person meeting. I also appreciate the administrators sitting through this. I see Christine there. I see Kate, Colleen, of course, Angie, but I mean, that's amazing because these policies affect them now and the SU direction affects them. And I think that they've been great about coming to these meetings.
Yeah, I see Jennifer Aldrich is also, yeah. And Katie Ahern. So thank you, everyone. Angie. And thank you to all of the tired other faces that I see. So I will take a motion to adjourn our meeting.
I can move that.
Is there a second?
Second. Markle, second.
And are we all in favor?
Aye.
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 Bye, guys.
So, thank you very much for all the work that you do. Have a great week. Stay well.
Bye, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you.